everybody. Yes, I'd like to say that it's a beautiful morning at Archbold in the Florida scrub, but it's a little drizzly out here, a little gray, not what I normally think of when I think about the Florida scrub. But hopefully you'll tune back in the coming weeks, because every Tuesday we're going to be out somewhere at Archbold live, and I'm sure we'll get some pretty blue skies on those other ones. Today, the idea is to talk about what's the Florida scrub and to spend about 35 minutes looking around here at all the plants and things that are around me. We've got some video clips we're going to put on for you too. And then we have two special guests for the question and answer section. We'll spend maybe 15 minutes on that part. So we have Dr. Warren Abrahamson and Lexi Siegel for the question and answer part at the end. But please use that chat throughout the whole time. Any observations you have, thoughts, questions that pop into your head, put them in the chat. We can't be out here together right now. Archbold is still closed to the public, but I want it to be as interactive as we can make it. And so if you see, a tree or a plant, or there's something you want to know more about, type it in the chat, and I might be able to just go right over and look at it, or we might have to wait for the question and answer part. Well, what I want to start with here is I'm going to flip my camera around so you see the view that I'm looking at, which is really nice. Despite the gray clouds, we have got a beautiful scrub setting right here. I'm going to slowly pan my phone around here. And if you do have your keyboard handy, I'd love to see some observations. First impressions. Are there any plants you recognize? If you were to describe this habitat to somebody, how would you describe it? How is it different from a pine forest or a seasonal pond, wetland area in Florida, or a hammock? See, I'm on a nice sandy road here. This is not the regular nature trail. I'm off several miles from the learning center, and a part of the property that is that's restricted to the public because this is the research site out here. So when I think of the scrub, I think of low and open. But you can ask yourself 3 questions if you want to know, hey, am I in the Florida scrub? 1, am I in Florida? Yes, I'm right in the middle of Florida, in Venus, Florida. 2, am I standing on white sand? Yes, look at all this white sand. We'll get up a little bit closer and look at it in a minute too. Number 3, are there any scrub oaks around? Yes, there's 3 different kinds of scrub oak species. One of them is right behind me here. This is myrtle oak. And if you are not familiar with the scrub, these scrub oak species will look more like bushes to you, but they're actually really old trees. It's just that out here, things don't usually get too tall because of a very important ecosystem process that we'll talk about a little bit later. If you know what it is, though, you can type it in the chat. It is January 12th, and if you are up in New York or some other place, maybe there's snow on the ground or there's no leaves on the trees, and you thought, oh, let's tune in to Florida and see what's going on. Yeah, it still looks pretty green out here in January, but we do have seasons. We're in the dry season, even though it's a little drizzly this morning. And in the winter, there's not a lot blooming. You don't see a lot of flowers blooming in the winter. But we are in luck because all around this site up here, we have a flower that's really pretty. I'm going to scooch down, show you what I'm talking about here. This is called the Sandhill wireweed. And when it's not blooming, it's a plant that you'd walk right past and you might not even notice, but it adds a little spark of color. The flowers are white. They have, some of them are pink, and they have a little bit of a rusty tinge too. A little bit of a rusty tinge. Oh, someone said it looks like the surface of the moon. The scrub is a bizarre habitat the first time you enter it, because it feels kind of like a desert, but has plants. It's like I've heard it called an elfish forest, or a dwarf forest. And actually, when I do these types of events, I like to get down on the ground, because that's when you really see what the scrub looks like. When you get down on the ground, you pretend you're a gopher tortoise or something. Now, I actually have another lens with me. I'm going to switch. Here's my wide angle lens, is what I was using to show you that view a few minutes ago. But I have a macro lens, which is basically a magnifying glass right here. And I'm going to stick this on. And we're going to actually get up nice and close. There, when they like screw it on there. We're going to get up really nice and close with this magnifying glass and look at these wireweed flowers. So let's switch our camera. Take a look at these. Oh my gosh. You know, so many things in the Florida scrub, you really have to get your face right up to it in order to see how beautiful it is. Let's look at another one here. Oh yeah, look at these. So this is a plant that you only find in Florida, the Sandhill wireweed. And for my plant nerds, let's see if I can get the scientific name right. Polygonella robusta. Pretty sure that's it. Dr. Abe can correct me at the end if I'm wrong. What I think is one of the things that I think is cool about these is that white that we're seeing, those are actually not flower petals. They're sepals. This flower doesn't have any flower petals. So what am I talking about here? Well, normally the sepal is the kind of like the outer layer of the flower that protects it, and then as it opens up, it's on the bottom of the flower. Usually it's greenish, and it doesn't look like a petal. But these ones are so cool that those are actually the sepals. And if you looked really close, you might even been able to spot the anthers with the pollen. These are so tiny. I'm looking with my eye. I can barely see them with my eyes. I'm going to switch to the lens again, and you'll see. The other thing I'm going to do is we've got other cool stuff on the ground around me. So I am going to look around, see some lichen, some cool stuff on the ground. So I'm going to switch again. And let's see. Can you spot the little anthers at the end of these flowers where the pollen is? Okay, let's take a look at some of the other things we've got here. Let's get up nice and close. Whoa, this is spike moss. And spike moss, I get very excited about, actually, because this is a very ancient type of plant. And they have been around, this genus has been around for hundreds of millions of years. They don't have seeds. They have spores like a fern. Let's see, what else do we have here? What else do we have? Oh, here's, we can see the sand up close. Those little grains of sand that looks kind of like glass. And what else? Oh, we've got some partridge pea. Partridge pea is one of my favorite plants out here. More partridge pea. They get a pretty yellow flower that's pollinated by bumblebees. And if you look real close at the base of each of those little leaves, where it connects to the stem, is a tiny little cup, and that cup has nectar in it. The nectar is for ants. Seriously, it's for ants, and the ants protect it. Let's see what else they have. Oh, we've got some lichen here. some ground lichen. Up close, I don't know, this one looks a little bit like, I don't know, broccoli or something. And we've got the decomposing leaves down here of the myrtle oak decomposing down here. Okay, I'm gonna take our lens back off. And this is what we've been looking at. Partridge Pea, and there's the lichen we were looking at here with the little leaves. Pretty cool. If you end up wanting me to look at something else while we're out here close up like that, let me know. And if I've got time, I'm happy to do it again. It takes a little while to switch that lens on and off though, so I can't do it over and over again. I want to walk over and show you something else. But while I'm walking, let's talk a little more about the sand. The Florida scrub in Florida, you find it on white sand. I already mentioned that. These are high and dry parts of Florida, and sometimes you find scrub on the coasts, sand dunes on the coast, but I'm not on the coast. So how did I end up with a big old sand dune in the middle of the state? Well, this is an ancient sand dune island. It's called the Lake Wales Ridge. Archbold sits right on the south end of it, but it's about almost 120 miles north-south. You can see it from outer space. Pretty cool. And this sand was originally part of the southern Appalachian Mountains. The mountains were weathered, and then erosion brought them down south and into Florida to make these big piles of sand. When the ocean has been higher, which has happened several times in the past, it's pushed that sand into dunes in the middle of the state. This isn't the only one. There's other ones around here too, but this is the oldest and the biggest of them. Okay, behind me here is something else that's very cool. Can you all see what's behind me? If you know what this is, you can type it in the chat. And my guess is when they were from, I saw a lot of Florida places. So I'm guessing that this is going to look familiar to a lot of people. And in fact, the outside of this burrow, I actually see some tracks here. These are made by the animal. This is a gopher tortoise burrow. You see that the shape there has a flat bottom and then a rounded roof. And if you think about the shape of a tortoise, that's what you get. Flat bottom, rounded top. And the tortoises make this to fit their size. And if they have something that's going in there that they don't want, they can turn sideways and block the path. So that gives you an idea of how big the tortoise is just by looking at the entrance. There might be a tortoise in there, but I don't see one. They come out usually they come out once it's nice and warm and sunny. So that's why I'm wondering if maybe it's still hanging out in there today. I don't know. Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll pop out. Gopher tortoises are really important because they are keystone species. If you've never heard this phrase before, a keystone species is a species that's doing a lot for its ecosystem, that's benefiting the other species in the ecosystem. In this case, this burrow here, I'll turn like this, you can see it behind me there. This burrow here is used by hundreds of other animals. Researchers have found about 360 other species that use burrows. Now, most of them are going to be things like insects, but sometimes birds will even go in there for refuge. Snakes love these. The Florida mouse goes in there. The gopher frog lives in there. Small mammals will go in there sometimes. So they are a really important keystone species. They are actually protected in Florida. And if you live in Highlands County here, they may seem like they're everywhere because people have them right in their backyards. But the thing is that the habitats in Florida where they live, like the Florida scrub, have been, largely lost to different kinds of development. So they're now a protected species. And if you want to build a house or something on an area with gopher tortoises, you have to get special permission from the government to build it there. And hopefully it'll work out and they'll take the tortoise and move it to another place that knows how to set up an area for them to live. You can't just take the tortoise and move it somewhere. It does not work like that. I did bring something with me today, a little bit of show and tell here. I have a tortoise, an old tortoise shell here. Old tortoise shell. But something a little different about this tortoise shell when I flip it over. What is that? Hopefully that's coming out clear and you can see what I'm looking at here. This is pretty cool. This was a discovery here at Archbold back, I think 20 years ago or so. One of the researchers was walking around in the scrub and they saw a tortoise shell and they went to pick it up and it was stuck to the sand. It was stuck to the ground. So what's going on? And so they looked a little closer and they realized that there was these tubes, all these little tubes going from the shell to the sand. Gosh, what could that have been? Well, it turns out that a caterpillar actually made this. A caterpillar makes these made out of silk, and they've got sand mixed in there, and they eat the keratin on the outside of the shell. You see the shell still has some of the outer layers here of the keratin, just like our fingernails are made of keratin. And this moth caterpillar can actually eat that. That's its main source of food. Pretty amazing. Okay, we're gonna pop up. I've got a picture so you can see what this moth looks like. So we're gonna pop up some of the photos that the researchers took. So this was the Dayrups and the Eisners worked on this project. This came out in 2005, where they dissected these tubes so you can see what the caterpillar looks like there. There's a picture on the right of the moth itself. And I love that one bee. That is with a scanning electron microscope of the adult moth. Pretty amazing. So today, these are, as far as we know, specialized to a species that is a threatened species. So this moth is probably also, an imperiled species. But what if we went back 10,000, 12,000 years ago? What could this have eaten back then? The tortoises were here, of course. But what about maybe bison coming through this area? Maybe they were also living off of the keratin sheaths on the horns of the bison. We don't know, but it's fun to imagine. All right, we're gonna go to a video about one of my favorite plants, saw palmettos, and this is about a 5-minute video. So enjoy. I've come out here today with Lexi Siegel, a research assistant in the Plant Ecology Research Program, because I am curious about saw palmettos. Lexi, can you show me a saw palmetto?
Right here.
So see that it kind of looks like a palm tree that never learned to grow to the sky. So they are growing along the ground. And the reason Lexi has brought her measuring tape with her is because we can actually learn how old that saw palmetto is by measuring it. We're gonna give it a try today.
So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take the beginning of the measuring tape and put it down at the front end of the palmetto where the leaves are. Then we're gonna stretch it all the way back until we can't see the trunk over the sand anymore. Then you can pin the beginning in place, and now we can see how long the palmetto trunk is. So this trunk here is about 90 centimeters long. After we get our total length of the trunk that's above ground, we divide it by 1.2, which is the growth rate for palmettos every year. So in this case, we take 90 centimeters above ground 90 divided by 1.2. So the part of the palmetto that is above the ground that we can see is 75 years old. We're going to show where this palmetto was in its growth during a couple important dates, like when the movie Frozen came out. Frozen came out in 2013, and it's 2021 right now. So that's 8 years ago. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 8 and multiply it by 1.2. And we're going to get 9.6, which is how many centimeters back we need to go to see where this palmetto was. And that's about right here. So this palmetto was right here when the movie Frozen came out. I calculated this earlier, and on my birthday, which is 1996, 30 centimeters back, the palmetto was right here. And on the first Earth Day in 1970, 51 years ago, the palmetto was right here.
Where did this magic number of 1.2 centimeters come from? Well, it's not magic, it's science. Dr. Warren Abrahamson and his colleagues have been measuring hundreds of saw palmettos here at Archbold for decades. For around 40 years they've been doing these studies. And they found that at Archbold, in our Florida scrub and scrubby flatwoods where it's really bright and shiny, the saw palmettos grow about 1.2 centimeters on average. The saw palmetto that Lexi was measuring, we could see about 75 years of growth there. But if we'd start digging back into the sand, we could see that it was even older and continued to go back. If you actually dig up a saw palmetto, this is what it looks like. Almost like a alien crustacean or something like that. Here are the roots coming down from the stem here. This one doesn't have the protective bark on the outside. This is where the palm would be at the end. Here's the really cool thing though. Yes, they grow from seeds, but sometimes you can find saw palmettos where near the front tip, you can see that it branches. Saw palmettos branch, and then as that branch grows off further, it actually will become its own plant. How do you tell how old they are? Because after they start growing, eventually they lose their connections. You couldn't dig them all up and find the connections underground. Well, Abe and his colleagues, they did an experiment where they looked at all the saw palmettos in a 20 by 20 meter area, and they took a genetic sample from each of them. They could see by looking at the DNA if the saw palmetto here is the same one as the one that was over, 20 feet over that way. And then because they knew the growth rate, they could estimate how old that clonal group was. The average age was 5,000 years old. The oldest was 8,000 years old. And imagine if instead of 20 by 20 meters, if it was 40 by 40 meters, maybe the oldest would have been 10,000 years old. We know that these have been here for a long time and they live for a long time. We have a lake at Archbold called Lake Annie. It's pretty deep, about 70 feet deep, and we've actually taken cores from the bottom, scooped up the muck at the bottom, and we have found saw palmetto pollen that is 37,000 years old down at the bottom of our lake. Pretty amazing. So this species, not only does it live for a very long time, but it has been here at Archbold for a long time.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now you try this at home and see how old your palmettos are in your neighborhood.
I love saw palmettos. The other thing we didn't go into in that video is how important saw palmettos are to the whole ecosystem because of their flowers and fruits. Black bears love to eat their little fruits, and the flowers themselves. At Archbold, we have counted how many different species of insects visit the flowers. It was over 300. It was 311, if I'm remembering right. That's a lot. None of those insects were specialists. They were all, also doing other things. So the saw palmettos are a little bit like gas stations or coffee shops that the insects are using to get some energy and then go about and do the other things they need to do during the day. Well, in the beginning, I mentioned that this is low and open here, and I'll put my selfie stick way out there. Pretty low and open, And I said there's some ecosystem processes that help us understand this. Well, I mentioned one that it's the dry season. Florida is an interesting place because it does get a lot of water. We get here at Archbold something like 50, 55 inches of rain per year, but most of it is during the wet season. And winter is the dry season. So it's hard for things to grow. And the sand itself doesn't have a whole lot of nutrients in it. So it's also hard for things to grow. But life finds a way. But the process that I was thinking about was not the rain or climate, but fire. Florida is the lightning strike capital of North America. And fire has been a part of this ecosystem for many thousands of years, and maybe even longer than that. Where the plants that we actually see here out today, their great grandparents thousands of years ago were dealing with lightning strikes and fire and have made adaptations to it. But I came to a very special type of scrub. This is even more open than a regular scrub is because this is a rosemary scrub, also called rosemary bulb. So the plants that you're seeing behind me, this is called Florida rosemary. And I'm surrounded, I see Florida rosemary all around. It's not related to the rosemary that you eat, but it does have a nice smell to it. And the Florida rosemary actually uses chemical warfare against the other plants. So it puts into the sand through its roots and leaves a chemical that inhibits growth from other plants. So that actually also helps keep it low and open here. We have a really great video about our research on fire, and we're not gonna show the whole thing, but check it out on our YouTube page later. But let's watch just a minute or two of it, and we're gonna cut like right to the middle of this video so you can see what the fires look like out here and watch how the landscape responds after months to years after a fire. What does it look like? I should say this film was made by Into Nature Films.
Most plants here agree that the best way to survive the burn is to go below ground. The tortoise knows that. So do all the insects, lizards, frogs, snakes, and mammals who burrow into the sand or use tortoise burrows to escape the fire. Scrub plants like oaks and palmettos store everything vital below ground in massive storage organs, roots, and rhizomes. Below ground, fire can't do much to you. Heat dies quickly on the surface of the ground, rapidly cooling in the dense sugar sand. Research at Archbold showed 80% of the palmetto is subterranean. Fire consumes the above-ground vegetation, but fire does not kill these plants. Within weeks after a fire, palmettos and oaks rise again out of the black. We call them resprouters. Resprouters use nutrients left by the fire to help produce new green shoots. In nature's big picture, this is a small setback. By burying temperature data loggers in the sand right before a fire, we can study the relationship between fire temperature and the survival and growth of the resprouters. We have found that oaks and palmettos are resilient to a range of fire frequencies and intensities. They can tolerate temperatures up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's hot. After fire, resprouting plants grow rapidly. And by 6 months or a year, they look pretty much the same as they did before the fire. So resprouters don't experience a population explosion like the reseeders. They are more or less in the same place and the same size before and after fire. Fire stimulates flowering for many resprouters, especially Palafoxia fei and palmettos.
All right, Laura, let's pause
Meet the
that.
joint.
Like I said, though, that is on Archbold Biological Station's YouTube page, and we have other videos on there as well, so you can learn all about the research. I wanted to show you that clip for two reasons. One, so you could see what a prescribed fire looks like. These are done by professionals, 5, 10 people going out who've been trained to do these. And they can only do it when the weather is a certain way. You know, they're taking into account the direction of the wind and all of that. Lightning can still start fires, but we don't want wildfires. We don't want our houses to burn down. And there's also so many roads and ditches now that fire can't travel like it used to because everything has been fragmented. All the natural areas have been fragmented. The prescribed fire is a really wonderful conservation tool, good land management tool. So I wanted you to see what the fires look like and how the landscape responds. Someone earlier mentioned that the scrub is kind of weird looking, almost looks like a moonscape or alien planet or something. When you go to a site that's recently been burned, it is pretty bizarre, because what you see are all of these saw palmetto skeletons everywhere. It's pretty amazing. But then you go back a couple months later and it's pretty green again, pretty green. The other reason I wanted to show that is because it illustrates some of the science at Archbold. And when people think about Archbold, they don't always know how to categorize us. Is it a nature center, a museum? Is it a preserve? Is it a state park? What is a biological field station? We are a nonprofit. This is private land, and a biological field station is a site. It is a nature preserve, but it's a site for researchers to study. We have our own researchers that are full-time. We have a lot of interns, which are people who are young in their careers, and they live here for about 6 months usually. And we have visiting researchers from different universities, from agencies, from all over the country, sometimes from other countries, coming to study at our sites. Archbold has about 20,000 acres in Florida. Some of it is here. About half of it is where I am right now. And then the other half of it is our cattle ranch, which is like about 10 miles from here, probably, from where I'm standing. So I do like that video also shows what kind of research we do here. Fire is a big part of the research. Now, somebody earlier in the comments said, can you look at 2 different kinds of lichen? We've only got a couple of minutes here, but I put my macro lens back on, and I found a spot with 2 lichens. So I'm gonna get back down on the ground here, and we can take a look with our macro lens. Here's 2 different kinds. Let me move this. There's actually 3 things here. So there's 2 different kinds of ground lichen. And then the spike moss is also right here. They're all hanging out together. And I do not know the species names well enough. We need to get Seth as our lichen guy out here. Now it's a little rainy and drizzly this morning, so these look differently. If you came out here on a real dry day, these would look like a dried up. This one here would look like a dried up sponge. This really white one. So they all look nice and beautiful. Ooh, I found something cool. Okay, I'm gonna move over here. Does anybody recognize what this little pellet here is? And these are pretty common out here in the scrub. This is rabbit poop. You can see that rabbits are definitely herbivores. When you find those little pellets, you can see just all vegetation in there. Oh, and I should mention that those caterpillars, those are decomposers helping to decompose the shelf. In nature, nothing goes to waste. So there's always something that finds that little a niche to thrive. And I love that. Like, what are you going to do with the that material, that keratin material? Well, in Florida, we've got a moth that does that. So some final thoughts here. I appreciate y'all coming out and learning about the scrub with me. If you've never been to the scrub, go and find a scrub site. Archbold is still closed right now to the public, but there are scrub sites throughout the state. It's not just the Lake Wales Ridge. And there's other scrub sites near here on the ridge if you really wanted to, but it's on the coast as well. So wherever you are, there's probably some scrub that's not too far of a drive. And I'd like to end before we get to the question and answer with the scrub pledge, which is what we do with our 4th grade classes when they come. And it's to tell at least 2 people about the Florida scrub. Why do we make this pledge? Well, because the scrub is an endangered ecosystem. So much of it is gone. On the Lake Wales Ridge, we did an analysis at Archbold, and there's something like about 86% of the natural habitats on the ridge, a lot of it, which would be scrub, are gone. So one of the problems is people don't even know about the scrub. I'm probably talking to people who already are familiar, but if you can spread the word, tell people about the scrub and the gopher tortoises and all this good stuff, then I think the scrub has a chance. All right, we are going to bring on our guests, and we've got 2 wonderful guests today. Dr. Warren Abrahamson, who is, well, actually, I'll let them introduce themselves. So we've got Dr. Abe and Lexi.
Lexi
Hey, hi,
is having
Dustin.
trouble getting on, so I'm trying to work with her, Dustin.
Oh, okay, sounds like Abe's there.
Abe's here.
I am
Hey.
there. How are you?
Good. Do you have video? Oh, there you are.
Hey,
Hey.
yeah, just popping in.
So can you introduce yourself, Abe?
Well, I'm a retired biology ecologist. Worked at Bucknell University for 40 years, but I've worked at Archbold longer and got started when I was a graduate student, and I've been working at Archbold for 49 years. So anyway, I'm a research associate at Archbold. Love it.
Awesome. I see that we've got some questions in the Q&A. Laura, can you do this, or are you busy getting you're probably getting Lexi on? So I'll look at them here. So there's a comment, not exactly a question, but somebody was wondering about buzz pollination with the partridge peas. Abe, what can you tell us about buzz pollination?
That's a really cool kind of mechanism that a number of insects use, primarily those that are like bees, and they'll come into the blossom. Often these blossoms tend to be ones that hang, or they might very well be a little sideways. But once they get into the blossom itself, they give it a really rapid buzz, and you can just see the pollen release, and it coats their bodies. So they're picking up a great deal of pollen in the process. Wonderful way to pollinate.
Cool. Now you've worked on all kinds of things here. Have you ever done any of the Rosemary projects?
Yeah, I had a postdoc, Ann Johnson, who worked with me for, I guess 3-4 years. And her primary interest was on Florida rosemary. And we were very interested in it because it's got kind of a cool growth form, but also that where it grows usually doesn't have a lot of oaks. If you look around the Florida rosemary sites, they tend to be very open, and they have gaps, as we call them, which are really important for all those little lichens you were looking at, and many of the other plants that are endangered in the Florida scrub. And so, yeah, we looked a lot at how rosemary grew, how long it took to reproduce. In the long-term studies that we've been doing with fire, we've been very interested to see how well Florida rosemary tolerates burn cycles, fire return times of differing amounts. And we can very quickly see that if we have fires that occur too frequently, Florida rosemary begins to drop out of the system. Your video that you showed that Eric was narrating, Mangus that is, talked about resprouters, but he also alluded to cedars, and the Florida rosemary is one of those plants. It does not tolerate fire. Fire kills it. gone. And so it has to start over again by seed. And it does so very effectively. But if fires are too, what shall I say, too infrequent in the community, then what ends up happening is the Florida rosemaries can get larger, the gap sizes go down, many of our endangered small plants begin to decline in numbers, and ultimately the Florida rosemary doesn't do particularly well. They senesce, they get old, maybe kind of like I am now, but anyway, they start getting old and they end up beginning to collapse. So Florida rosemary is a pretty cool plant, no question.
Nice. And I'd like to just remind people to use that chat, use the Q&A, give us some questions. I can see that you're on here. We have some shy people. Not everybody's shy. I think it was Susan. You've been the only one using our the Q&A. And I like your comment. Gotta love poop. She's enthusiastic about all the stuff we were looking at. But let's get on there, ask some questions. How often do you get to have Abe here and ask him questions?
We do have Lexi now too.
Yay! Hey, Lexi, do you want to introduce yourself? Well, maybe we don't quite.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Hey!
Hi, I'm Lexi Siegel. I work in the plant ecology program here at Archbold.
Cool. And Lexi, could you tell us what's a typical day like for you working here?
It varies greatly depending on what projects we're doing. Lately, we have been doing a lot of demography work with Florida ziziphus, which is one of the rare endangered plants found on the Lake Wales Ridge. Ziziphus is interesting because it's a really old genus, and in addition to that, a lot of the populations we found are actually clones of each other. So there's not too much genetic diversity there.
And correct me if I'm wrong, those are all off-site, right? We're going on different private and federal state lands?
Yep, they're all off-site, so we're going all over the state.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I've been to one ziziphus site, and it was pretty interesting because it's something that you would walk right past and not notice. It looked like a big thorn bush, and I could see why people would have just mowed it down and planted grass for their cows or that kind of thing, because it didn't look like something you'd want to walk through. But it's cool that once I started learning about it, I was really blown away by how cool it was. One of the things that I had learned was that it's so rare that when it was first described in the 1980s, it was described from a 40-year-old specimen that had been in a herbarium, and no one had ever had any other ones. So they actually figured that it could be extinct. And then a few years after that, they found one that was alive out there. And since then, found like maybe 10 different populations, something like that. Does that sound right? Yeah, they're super cool. Okay, Laura, do we have any other questions coming in?
We have a couple of questions in the chat. And now, forgive me if you said this while I was trying to help Lexi. Since wireweed is flowering in winter, is that a good food resource for honeybees?
Hey, Abe, you want to take that?
Well, I'm no pollination expert. You really ought to have Mark here, but in any case, yeah, sure would be, because it's interesting. There are a lot of plants that flower a little different time than many others, and there have been some wonderful projects done looking at the interactions of various plants and insects. And there does appear to be some degree of sort of shifts in timing of flowering and fruit set, which may very well, of course, work better for some insects than others. But yeah, I would think that, when you've got something out there and there's not a lot of other resources, that becomes a very important resource for any insect that's primarily a nectar or pollen feeder.
If you look in the Florida wildlife field guide, it says that species is not supposed to be blooming right now. It says it as a fall species, And there's a very similar one called the October flower, which tells you, yeah, they're supposed to be blooming in the fall. But I always like to say this: the animals and the plants don't read the field guides, so they're going to do it when they want to. When we did have an interesting project, maybe it was 2 years ago. Abe, I don't know if you saw this. Lexi probably did. An intern had looked at all of these years of data Archbold had on flowering times for, I don't remember, half a dozen species of flowers at Archbold. And was trying to see, have they changed over the decades? And what I remember from it was hard to see a correlation with climate change for this area specifically, but they did notice that if there was dry years or wet years, and when that rain came, that seemed to be the big factor that was shifting the same flower species from one year and then another year would bloom at totally like different months, depending on what was going on in the ecosystem with the weather that year. Did you see that one, Abe?
Yeah, I was somewhat familiar with it, but you know what? Just to comment sort of and take it a little further, one of the interesting projects that we've done at Archbold, the former executive director, Jim Lane, and his associates started a oak mast. And when we talk about mast, what we're talking about is fruit set. And so the question is, how well do some of the acorn crops produce? And of course, Archbold has a host of oaks. We've got at least 6 very common oaks, and there are others that are much, much less frequent. But anyway, the point is that over a 27-year period, when we analyzed the data, and I got involved at the data analysis point, what we found was that there was no single year in which acorn crops failed out of 27. Now, what affected it the most was actually things like moisture and potentially temperature. And so, although Florida doesn't have a big issue as far as freezing the flowers off oak trees, that's not usually an issue because that usually occurs in March and April. But the acorn set is very dependent on resources like water. And so if you look years ahead, and with oaks, you've got to go either 2 or even 3 years out, depending on whether they're in the white oak group or red oak group. Anyway, point is that there was always some acorns for wildlife to feed on, but which acorn species was available differed with given years. So that nice long-term data set was very, very helpful in that regard. And of course, the Bird Lab is currently still doing lots of data collection on acorn mast because they're so important to the scrub jay.
Nice. Thank you. Well, it looks like we are out of time. I did want to, there was a couple of comments there. I saw, yes, Florida Ziziphus, which is Ziziphus celata with a C is the Latin name for it, if you're Googling. And then the other question was longleaf pines. These are slash pines that you might notice around me. So they look a lot like longleaf pines. They got the big long needles. And I think that was all the questions. Did we miss any, Laura?
Yeah, there was one more. And again, I did miss a little bit. Did you talk any about whatever mushrooms might be out there? River was curious about earth stars or any other mushrooms that you might see out there.
I haven't seen any today, but actually it would be a great day for earth stars because they love the rain. Nice moist day like this, is when they open up and send their spores up. So if I had seen an earth star, yeah, I would have grabbed one. There's not a lot of dead wood in the scrub because of the fires. So whenever you do find dead wood hanging around, there seems to be always mushrooms.